good day. Welcome to Reconcile Africa, where we have discussions that awaken us to the consciousness of the reality that we are one, while enlivening that spirit of solidarity that results in love and caring acts which uplift global Africa. Today, we are discussing the youthful drive to redefine Pan-Africanism, and we have on the show, on this webinar, some of the greatest minds from across the global African diaspora. We have Chebbi from the African Union, the African Union Youth Envoy. We have Claire Clotte, a broadcast journalist, and many more things she'll be telling you about. She's a resident moderator at the Center for Pan-African Thought. We also have with us Raina Turner, co-president of African Diaspora Nation, executive director of the Sustainable Community Development Network. And we are all gathered here to delve into one very important topic: the youthful drive to redefine Pan-Africanism. So welcome to the show. We'll go around, we'll let the panelists tell you who they are in a little bit more detail. So over to you, Aya.
Hello, thanks so much for having me on this important webinar in this important day, celebrating Africa Liberation Day. So my name is Chebbi. I'm from Tunisia, and I identify myself as a feminist Pan-African. And I'm now the Youth Envoy in the African Union, was appointed recently in last November. But before that, I had about 8 years of Pan-African activism. So starting from Tunisia's revolution, I went on a journey in different African countries, supporting youth movements, social movements that are rising for democracy and rights and equality. And formed the Afrika Youth Movement, which today has around 10,000 youth from 42 African countries and diaspora. So really, Pan-African question is at the heart of what I've been doing the last couple of years. And I think it's also a journey of self-discovery as a Pan-Africanist and as my African identity. So very happy to be here and to meet you all.
Thank you, and welcome, Aya. We'll then move on to Claire from the UK.
Hi there, my name's Claire Clotte, and it's very interesting when you use the term Pan-African. I was given that term. I had always just been someone who was interested in my own identity, being Black, British, growing up in a Ghanaian household, living in a predominantly white area, going to a predominantly white school. So my journey into Pan-Africanism has definitely been self-centered, and it's impacted all of the journalism work that I do, all the content that I create, all the events that I affiliate for, all the events and debates that I moderate. And it's been really, really interesting because it's just been a natural progression into some really interesting paths, down some really interesting routes. I am very closely connected to the Caribbean community where I live in West London, and there's quite a large Caribbean community. So growing up, there weren't many there weren't many people who claimed to be African, whereas now we're living in a time where everyone's like, yes, we're cousins, or I've got, this percentage of what have you not. So I'm just loving exploring all the stories and sharing them with the wider community.
Fabulous. Happy to have you, Claire. And
Thank
now,
you.
Raina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, I am the co-president of the African Diaspora Nation. I'm happy to be here. I would say and echo Claire a bit. When I think about, how I got involved to this state, I would say it really came from being, I guess you can say, privileged, growing up in Atlanta, and then leaving, and then seeing the drastic the contrast, right? Not knowing how good you have it until you're gone.
Yeah.
And so returning back to Atlanta, maybe after being gone for almost 8 years, I've been working in international development, looking at sustainable development and how we do that in a way that respects our ancestors and indigenous populations. And it really tied back into a volunteering opportunity I had to work with African-centered schools. So I got the opportunity to work with Nana Marimba Ani and the greats that are here in Atlanta, the Barutis, everybody that's coming from this, most people say Afrocentric, but it's more of African-centered thought. and ideology, and being able to work with them and learn from them and incorporate that into how I move, and all of the opportunities that we have here in Atlanta to continue to bridge that gap across the diaspora really put us in a really good position, if you will, to be the Pan-Africanists of today. So I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into this new age thought and what it looks like for us. But that's really the background. It's really been learning from my elders, sitting at their feet and seeing how we can actually apply that to modern day challenges.
That is amazing and interesting. So maintaining the central and core value of whatever it is Pan-Africanism means, but recontextualizing it to the demands of the 21st century. I'm going to go to Aya and start with this, since she is the official nearing African Union Youth Envoy. First of all, what is Pan-Africanism for the uninitiated? And what have been some of the major accomplishments of the movement up till today? And from a youth perspective, how do we bring it and break it down so that we have continuity across generations and we're able to maintain the momentum?
Yeah. I was actually going to comment that I lived in Georgia for a year. So Georgia is very close to my heart. I was a Fulbright scholar in Statesboro, which I called States boring for a while because it's in the middle of nowhere. But I really, really enjoyed my time there because it was also an educative space to change the narrative about social movements. And it was 2012, so it was right after the revolution. So I had a really exciting time in Georgia. I love it. So maybe I'll just go back to, because I think when you talk about Pan-Africanism today, especially for me, it's really started as a personal experience to continue the struggle. So I come from Tunisia, and I have different identities of being Mediterranean, being Maghrebian, being Arab, but I've never grew up learning about my African identity. And it's not in the education system. North Africa is pretty much disconnected economically and politically from the continent. And I had so many questions of what really relates me to Africa. And I had this two turning point experiences for me. One was at the refugee camp on the Tunisian-Libyan borders when right after Tunisia-Libya revolution started, and we had around 1 million refugees in June 2011. And I was there volunteering, and I was surprised that most of the refugees who came were African migrants from all over the continent. And that was for me a book into African historiography, because I heard stories all day long about Liberia Civil War or Senegambia or the naming ritual in Ghana. And that was really my first curiosity question of what does relate me to Africa. And I think the second experience which led me into connecting to different struggles, which is again at the heart of Pan-Africanism, which is a continuation of the struggle, is how different movements across Africa connected to our struggle and were inspired by the Tunisian revolution. Senegal UNAMAR movement, just 2 weeks after Tunisia, started raising the same slogan. Burkinabe youth started raising the same slogan, Blaise dégage, Wade dégage. And I was fascinated by that. So the word was really looking at, the Middle East and calling it the Arab Spring, which I don't like it. And I think it's a Western narrative because we call it the Revolution of Dignity. But also there was no light on the movement that swept across Africa for social justice, which reminded me of, the liberation movements in the 50s and the 60s. And then when I went back to start to connect, because it's not in our education, start to read about it and what drove the Pan-African movement and how it started, I was fascinated by the, the similarity, as if history is repeating itself, because it's all about dignity. The slogan we rose in the revolution was dignity, employment, and freedom. And these are some of the same things. So if we say employment, we say economic determination or economic aspiration. And so for me, it was Pan-Africanism of the 50s and 60s, and even before, because I don't think it really started with the liberation movement. It started even before with Garvey and before that. But I think it always has been about the universal dignity of all Africans and the economic determinism and aspiration, the political aspiration, the geographical aspiration, the spiritual aspiration. And I think it was all linked toward the ownership of our land, of our production, of our lives and our livelihoods. But I think there was a thread across that which was racism and violence against people of color. I think it was a dominated theme throughout this struggle, and I think it continues to be. Today we have Black Lives Matter because of that, because it's race-based and continue to be about the oppression of Black people. But I think if I would define it in an essence, it is about equality, dignity, and respect, and it is a liberation struggle for the ownership. And I was really fascinated, and I think that's how I started even the movement, when I started traveling and learning about different youth movements struggles and realizing how similar our struggles are. I was fascinated by the fact that in 1960, 10 African countries got independence, and they organized, you know, with no technology, with no Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp and all the means we have today. And I asked, you know, my peers the question, like, why are we not organizing today? You know, like, they didn't have all these technology and means we have today, and they managed to organize in solidarity. They managed to organize their congresses and their conferences and across borders. It's not, they didn't get independence in 1 year because the colonizer decided, oh, I'm gonna liberate these 10 countries, because they have organized for a long time across borders, diaspora, Africa, and they managed to get to that point. So I think that particular realization of solidarity, or the Ubuntu, as a universal value is, I think, what sparked me into the belief that actually the solution to today's struggle of young people is unity and is Pan-Africanism, especially that we are the youngest generation in human history. So Africa has not been as young as today. It's 65% under 30. So if we all decide to form a political party, we will oust every other party, you know? Mm-hmm. So the level of, I think, solidarity and the radical liberation spirit is what we need today in order to continue to organize. In terms of the accomplishment, I mean, there are a lot of accomplishment and a lot of challenges that we can talk about, but I think to start with, I think it is a question of dignity. It is a question of ownership.
That is fabulous. Such great thoughts. So one thing that comes to mind, right? When we talk within the context of a struggle, it is a reactionary. You know, we reacting to a system which essentially oppresses or suppresses full expression as human beings, right? So one thing that, even as we spoke about redefining Pan-Africanism for the 21st century, or within our contemporary context, it's the point you made that we are talking about coming to human fruition. We're talking about human dignity. We're talking about equality, right? And these struggles are essentially against the influences or the forces which inhibit the attainment of these things which we consider basic and fundamental to being human, right? So it's within this context, it's not as much reactionary as we are just trying to actuate and deliver our unique value proposition to the world as our unique African selves, right? But it's really about fighting the forces which suppress that expression. What do you think about that thought?
I'd like to step in here, if I may. I think Pan-Africanism could move so much further, a lot quicker, if those who have a real comprehensive understanding of the history started to use language that was digestible and you know, easy to comprehend by the masses. I think in every society it's important to have, okay, I liken it to the old African saying, you know, every finger on the same hand isn't cut the same, but when it works together, it's very powerful, right? I think sometimes when it comes to the experts in Pan-Africanism, they can ostracize the wider community by the use of language and their real strong fundamental beliefs, when actually on the grassroots level, there is a mobilization, there is this intrigue, this interest, this desire to know more, to be reconnected, to grow, but it's not necessarily at the pace that the Pan-African leaders want it to be. And also, because there is such a difference in the language that's used, people then suddenly shy away and think, oh, well, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not quite there yet. Maybe that is a little bit more radical than I want to be perceived as, when actually it is the very thing that they want. So I think, you know, my role in Pan-Africanism is to very much subtly introduce people to information, to leaders, to content, to opportunities to learn and engage. And sometimes we're a very social people in a social way. Here in the UK, we have quite a big challenge with tribalism. And when I say tribalism, I'm talking about individual countries and those countries breaking it down on a minute scale. All the things that make us different, yeah, are beautiful, but at the same time we can't focus on the difference so much that we then start to disassociate with each other. And that's why I bring in the importance of bringing it back to a more digestible method of engaging people.
Superb point. And Raina, any thoughts?
Yes, I do. I love the perspective of everyone, and it still brings me back to some of my earlier critiques. Being a part of the Pan-African movement, being here, there is a separation, right? And I think it comes from this desire, at least from my perspective, it comes from a desire to be included in the whole. And oftentimes you find a difference in the language between who is considered to be a part of the diaspora or who is considered, you know, African. There's been a big challenge, and I think now there has been progress made as far as who's been considered to be a part of the diaspora, and it is all of us that are of African descent, whether we are in the UK, whether we are here in the Americas, the Caribbean, or continental Africans, or those who have just left, you know, first generation. And before, that wasn't a conversation that was being had. People would talk about it and have their own definitions and be moving in a certain way that excluded others. And I think that's why it's so beautiful that we're in the position that we're in now to move forward toward progress. I do agree with Claire around I won't call it separatist, but there is more of an elitist, if that's the best word to use, a vibration that comes oftentimes from those who have embraced Pan-Africanism from an intellectual level, right? And it may not have been intentional, but that's the impact, right? And I have a big thing about intent versus impact. And I think our elders that have been there have had an opportunity to digest it and to write about it and to intellectualize and to philosophize and to write these books that can further educate our people, so we don't have to start from the ground, from ground zero every single time. We actually have something to build upon, right? We're standing on the shoulders, you know, of those who have done this work, and we have a great opportunity. But at the same time, because we've gotten to a certain place, or because our elders have been in that certain place, there is an opportunity for us to break it down to a level for those that are coming up to be able to actually take the torch. And I think oftentimes we're so focused on, well, let me hold the baton because I know where it needs to go, but you have to trust this next generation to take the baton and move with it. It may not be the same way that you had envisioned it, but they'll be moving forward. And so that takes patience, you know, it takes understanding, it takes love. And oftentimes we talk about being warriors and pushing through and fighting, but there's a warrior couple here, the Mazimoyos, that focus on warrior, healer, builder. You have to heal. And we have to heal from a lot of the wounds that have been impressed upon us through colonialism, through enslavement. shy away from using slavery. But we have to make sure that we heal, and we're broken in various aspects, right? Whether it's waving the flag to say, oh, I'm separate, whether it's don't call me African because I'm Black, or I haven't fully been educated about my history, you know, intentionally. How are we going to also heal and move forward at the same time? So I feel like those are different aspects that we're going to have to address if we're going to move forward in a healthy way, because Pan-Africanism isn't just this intellectual side, right? You have the education, but you also have the social implications and the history. W.B. Du Bois and Garvey, they utilized, propaganda, you know, in a way that worked for us. That's how they're able to go beyond Twitter. They utilized the mechanisms of media that worked at that time, and it was beautifully done. And I think now we're in an even better position to have this quick mode of communication. It's just, we have some things we need to manage. I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's my 2 cents.
We have a young Pan-Africanist in the room, huh?
Yes, the future. Yeah, the future, yep.
Yeah, if I may just add, I think again, like Pan-Africanism emerged and re-emerged based on necessity. And I think the necessity of that time demanded Pan-Africanism to be anti-imperial, anti-colonial.
Yeah.
That was also the time of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so the language as well aspect that came about. But I think in the movement itself, we should also recognize that there was a lot of contradictions because in 1994 in Kampala, the ideologies were different, where Nkrumah was calling it an ideology of masses, Garvey calling for an African state, and Nyeri calling for sub-regional blocks, and then we go into Pan-Africanism. And I think what we ended up with is a state-centric ideology. And then there was a gap. So Pan-Africanism for me now as a young person is not about nation states. It's actually about a borderless Africa, where we do not have borders, where we have e-governance, where we have a single market, where we have e-commerce. And we're talking today in the African Union about the African passport. So this is a completely different way of how we see Pan-Africanism today as young people. It's actually maybe the opposite. You created the nation state that we want to today go beyond it, and we want to move beyond our borders. We want to trade with each other. We want the roads in Africa to lead to African countries and not to lead to outside of the continent. So I think that was one, which is the contradictions of the movement. The second thing I think is the gender and class question, because at the time, I think Blackness became a hegemonic reference, but it didn't include women as owners of the movement. They were just participants in the liberation, but after that, what happened? And that's why we quote, you know, all of the leaders that we quote are men. Yeah. You know, women are even erased from history and their contribution to Pan-Africanism. And I think that the class question is also, Pan-Africanism gave privilege to the few at the end of the day. So it became more middle class, the property owners, the highly educated who went to France and went to the UK, you know, and intellectuals who came afterwards and created that knowledge. So I think the question of gender and class should be addressed today, so we don't fall into the same kind of failure to be inclusive and representatives in the movement. And I would say that the last thing on generational question, which you touched on, is something close to my heart, especially because I think it's ridiculous today to have a continent with 25 average age as the population and 66 average age of the leadership. We have 45 gap of leadership, and we still talk about Pan-Africanism as ideology of the old, you know? Mm-hmm. And I, as much as I respect the passing the torch thing, I don't think we should be passed any torch. I think we should co-lead together. We should not be inheriting systems that we didn't understand. We should be co-designing the tables now, co-designing the system so we can lead. Otherwise, we will always be seen as the leaders of tomorrow, you know? And Nkrumah and Sankara, when they were 30 years old, no one told them, you're the leaders of tomorrow, you can't be president today. But all of us now today, when we were, you know, stepping into leadership positions, stepping into challenging the status quo, we were always told, yeah, you're the leaders of tomorrow. Even, you know, the countries that have gone through political transition and young people who have been leading social change, there was always this hijacking of youth leadership right after the transition, because you lead the revolution, good job, now it's for the old people to take over. So I think the intergenerational question we've been grappling with in Pan-Africanism itself, and we should reach a moment today to say, let's move to an intergenerational dialogue that leads to cooperation and co-leadership. It's not about telling you that you're not relevant anymore today. You are still relevant and you are a continuation of the struggle, but it is also our time to lead. So we need to do it together.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, I agree.
Such powerful and enlightening perspectives. And again, thankful that we have the opportunity to do this. And one thing I mentioned, she talked about e-governance, trade, infrastructure that facilitates better integration of our economies and all that. And moving from Pan-Africanism, which is more of a state actors, right, to a Pan-Africanism of the people, of the youth. And it brings me to a key question. So talking about this virtual, I mean, nothing stops us today from defining a virtual nation in the cloud, right? Technology allows us to do this. It allows us to have various ministries, whether it's of education, of health, essentially organizing according to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? And the question I have is, connecting the Pan-Africanist movement to the drive to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Will the Pan-Africanism we know of today be relevant if the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are met? What do you think about that, Aya?
Yeah, I'm muting my mic because of my nose. So, okay, I'm back. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, it's more about, we have been trying to articulate the systems of oppression, but we didn't move to action. And I think in spaces like the United Nations and the African Union, what we keep saying as young people is that we need to move from talkingism to action. So I think what Pan-Africanism taught us is that we need to first decolonize knowledge, because knowledge is a weapon of struggle and it has always been. Second, we need to decolonize organization, and that includes the gender perspective, the equality, the young, the old, and so on. And third is to move to action, to actually decolonize action and move to productivity. So I think in terms of frameworks, we have them. In terms of agenda, we have Agenda 2063 of the African Union with 10-year plan of action. We have Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals. We have the different frameworks, the convention, and so on. But what we need from leaders today is how they can move to action, from talking to action. And also there is this kind of mindset that they keep telling us, okay, we give you a voice, we give you a platform, you know, it's kind of like brainwashing us, because we need a little bit more than a voice to make youth employed today. Yeah. Voice would not get us out of our misery. So yeah, thank you, we have a voice, we have a microphone, but what are you doing about economic system that, you know, deliberately keeps women out of economic ownership, of land ownership? Why is that the richest, wealthiest African woman has to be the daughter of some thieving man, you know? So let us really address the real question with action. And okay, we need entrepreneurship, and everyone is trending entrepreneurship in Africa, but is it the entrepreneurship that enable the poor to become self-liberating and productive? So it's, again, you know, rooted in Pan-Africanism is always a question about ownership, self-liberation, and productivity. If we do not have these in these agenda, then this is not our agenda.
Yeah, access to opportunity. I mean, you've hit the nail on its head. It's one thing to say, oh, we've consulted, you know, we've gone out, we've spoken to young people, we've heard them. And it's another thing saying, right, okay, they're coming with some practical solutions. Let's act on some of their suggestions. Let's work together as one. And I think one of the major things that we can do to move Pan-Africanism along is to provide those opportunities for those who are on the continent, as well as those who are outside the continent, and like just keep the communication flowing and build on the communication.
Yes, likewise. I'm still here. I had to cut the video for a second. I fully agree with both of you. I would also add to make sure that anytime we are being engaged to, you know, to the certain level to say, well, let's get your input or let's have you present here, there's a charge, there's a level of accountability that moves us forward. So that when we know, okay, this is how we think, these are some of the things that we would like to see done. Now, what's the next step? Who is going to do it? Who is going to be held accountable? And what's the next check-in to ensure that it actually gets done so we can move the needle. So it's not just this tokenized seat that we're sitting in, it's more of an action-oriented seat that we have, you know, have a claim at.
Very, very powerful perspectives. One thing that comes to mind, so Pan-Africanism in the 40s and 50s and 60s was geared towards liberation from colonizers, oppressors, enslavers, and the like, right? But as I hear you talk, it sounds like at this point in the journey, it is not so much about those entities than we looking internally within ourselves, looking at those who have been custodians of a paradigm which didn't necessarily include women, right? And which didn't necessarily include youth, as she said, on the state level, right? So right now it seems like if there is an enemy out there, it seems that what I'm hearing is we are our own worst enemies within the people who have been traditionally within the Pan-Africanist community. We are our own worst enemies more than anybody else. How do you?
I mean, I think it's beautiful to see that people are recognizing that the power is within them. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm seeing that more and more as the years go by, where it used to be a thing of, right, let's go out there and reclaim our power. Now it's like, oh, it's inside me. The next question is, what do I do with it? Yeah. What do I do with it? Because we know we've got it. You can see from social media, Black Twitter, for example, is a prime example. I mean, I find my news through media outlets so much quicker than I do by picking up a newspaper or watching a television. You know, we are creating our own, we're telling our own stories. There's access to information at the click of a finger. But it's just coordinating ourselves. And this is where I do feel that some leadership from the elders who have reflected on what has worked and what hasn't worked would be useful to help us navigate this time. Because at the moment, as we form our new Pan-Africanist identities, we're still going down the same path of saying, right, okay, so this is for the feminists. This is for the LGBT community. This is for those who are reclaiming African spirituality and, you know, shunning Christianity. It's like, right, oh no, we're going into that silo thinking again, which isn't going to help us. So how can they help, you know, the leaders, the ones who've come before us, say, oh no, we did this with this. We did this with our economics. We did this with our health. We did this. Right, let's start to help you pull things back into the center again. One of the things that I think we need to really understand when talking about Pan-Africanism is this notion of African being Black. Mm-hmm. And I coming from Tunisia, you know, Raina being, you know, fairer complexion myself, you know, advocating for Africa, I would like to understand what's going on the youth level in terms of how are those conversations, those feelings, those emotions, any healing that's required, how is that being tackled? Because I mean, over here we have some outstanding Pan-Africanists who are shut down by their own because they don't look like, you know, someone who's got more melanin, and this whole notion of African and Black, it's just it hurts the whole process. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to Nkrumah when he says, I'm African not because I was born in Africa, but Africa because Africa was born in me. And of course, I mean, when I started mobilizing around Pan-Africanism with what I call a new Pan-Africanism, redefining Pan-Africanism as young people and having conversations with youth on African identity and how we should come together as a generation to uplift our continent, to get it out of poverty and to take up leadership positions we deserve. Of course, when I started, I mean, I remember in 2011, 2012, I would be called Muzungu in Kenya and Ebroni in Ghana, and I would, I would be seen as someone coming from Mexico or Spain or whatever. But because I was and I am, and I would continue to be obsessed with the idea of Pan-Africanism, I took the time to literally stop every single time someone have that perception and explain how does Tunisia relate to Africa, that even the name Africa comes from Tunisia, which was called, Carthage, the center of Africa as the capital, to explain that Algeria was the hub of liberation, that Mandela was trained in Algeria, and Algeria was the revolutionary space for the struggle, to talk about Egypt and Nasser, to talk about Gaddafi, to talk about all the founders who many of them came from North Africa, contributed to this Pan-African movement. So I think it comes from the fact that, again, we do not meet as people. We have built borders between us that we do not meet, and we do not even know what a Tunisian look like. I explain about the indigenous people of North Africa, Amazigh, because we were also, I had a friend from South Africa who told me, what do you think about, Arabs who colonized some African countries? And I answered her, yes, I was colonized, I was Arabized, because those North African lands were our lands as Amazigh, and Arabs came and colonized us. So I totally agree with you, because there is this perception that, oh, you are Arab, so you will defend Arabs. So there is no, I think first it is about people meeting each other and talking to each other about each other experiences. I think that's a very important connection, the human connection. But secondly is education. We do not have Pan-African education in our education system. The first book that I read by an African from south of the Sahara was in 2011, Chebbi. So in Tunisia, I didn't even have access to writers from other African countries, but I had access to Lebanese writers because it was Arabic, and to other writers. So education is very important, because that is what informs our history and what informs our understanding of where we came from. And if that is not possible, if people don't know that when they talk about ethnic diversity, they think, even in the school, I studied in SOAS, and in SOAS, my master was African studies, but North Africa was completely erased from the curriculum, right? Wow. Because they think, oh, you can't take a case study from North Africa because there is no ethnicity. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Libya has 120 tribes, and this is why it's in bullshit today, So how can you not talk about all the questions of Africa as one? Because our societies are very similar, and our cultures are very similar. Our music is very similar. We have instruments in Tunisia that they play in Niger. And if there is this conception that, North Africa is Middle East, while if I talk to a Yemeni or a Saudi or a Lebanese, they would not even understand my language, because Tunisian language is completely different. It's a mix of Amazigh and Arabic and French and so many languages. So it's only the Maghrebian who will understand the language as a Maghreb, but Middle Eastern will not, because they speak Arabic. So, even the culture, even when they tie it to more of Muslim culture, is also different. When they tie it to language, all of these, I think, was a construction of how we were divided into blocks and regions. And because we did not do the job of educating our youth, the generation of today, about our history, we ended up having curriculum that starts with colonization. That's not where our history starts. So if I'm gonna study as, 6, 7 years old, about Tunisia's history and start with the French colonization, that already sets you on a path of understanding who you are differently, right? And your identity. So in terms of today, the youth space, so when I did this journey and I was talking and taking the time to explain and so on, and I was really explaining this vision that is inclusive and that is really not about looking at our skin color or our geographical, where we come from, or our tribe or whatever. It's really about how, as a generation, we're going to get out of the trap of waithood. waiting for adulthood. This is where we are as a generation. So, you know, get away from all of these things that they told us you're different because of this and this and that, and let's focus on the goal here.
Yeah.
Let's focus on our liberation here. And I think after 8 years, I think now, I mean, I'm the youth envoy now, and I don't think I would have that kind of credibility to be in this space as an activist and to have a base of mobilization if I didn't do that work. Because now I have, you know, a youth movement that trust me, you know, believe in my vision and trust me to lead and trust me to connect them with the African Union and know exactly through action, not through my talks, through my action and what I have done for Pan-Africanism. So I think this generation is an opportunity to transition, because we are the more educated than any other generation. We are more tolerant. We have technology which bypasses the borders and make us talk to each other on the cloud. We all migrated online, you know, because we don't want visas and things like that. So I think we are in an opportunity because this generation really wants inclusiveness and it's open to each other. And I see that even from the feminist movement. I see the old feminist movement and how they can be exclusive to women from other, you know, ideologies or political orientation. And I see in the young feminist movement how inclusive it is, you know, regardless of ideological difference, regardless of how we identify gender or how we define it, still it is, you know, a generation that really wants to accept the other as they are. And this is what we need. We need to just accept the other person as they are and work together based on our common goal. In this case, ideology, Pan-Africanism. We need to work towards that.
Wow. Thanks.
I do have, yes, I have some thoughts as well to the question Claire posed. So in the same way as the history starting off with colonialism, here in the States, it starts off with your enslavement, right? And it starts off from slavery. So even the terminology enslavement, it actually encourages the concept that you had a culture prior to you being a slave, right? You were enslaved. And so there was a direct, you know, it was very intentional to break us from not only our native tongue, but from our culture and our history. And it's very shaped widely by the media, even to this day. I still have people, I literally just got back from Ghana, maybe 7 days ago, after about a month journey with my child and my husband. And family members are still saying, oh, I'm terrified to go to Africa. How could you go? And then you took your child. How could you do, you know? And so there's a very big disconnect. But in the same way, I will say, if anybody's familiar with the concept of the ring shout, what ended up happening when enslaved Africans were finally brought to the, what is now considered the United States of America, all the different cultures, whether it was, you know, Yoruba, Khan, those coming out of Senegal, anybody that spoke very different languages, they were actually brought here for, and we all know this, but for those who are tuning in, they were brought here not for their physical labor, but for the intellectual capacity, right? You have an ability to know how to map out rice fields. You have the knowledge of agriculture. You have the knowledge of building these cities and these massive cultures. You were brought here for your knowledge and your wisdom. And to tie that in, it is an honor and respect for everybody, regardless of even their religious identity, spirituality, language. They were able to get into a circle and take turns. It was almost like what you would consider to be your soul train line, but it was really more of like your spiritual circle of you get to go in and express yourself how you would traditionally, and we all give honor and respect because it is about Ubuntu, right? And that knowledge and wisdom was passed down, even when the drums were banned, even when you're not able to continue certain things. Now it's gone into your jazz, into your blues, and it's transformed through your history. And so without having that here in the States, this was all supplemented by my desire to learn and from my father saying, I can't believe you don't know these things. There's a major gap. We need to understand our history from our perspective. And so it wasn't given in the school system. Until this day, it's still not given, right? Unless you are going to a specialized African-centered school or you have somebody in your family or friends that have that background and knowledge. And so, yes, colorism is still a divide. Yes, being a fairer complexion, you know, is still something that comes up you know, but you had your Angela Davises and you have your other activists that were able to be in the limelight and still be a fair complexion and still be accepted, because we are all going through this struggle together. And at that point, it was a lot more apparent as far as who the enemy is. And now we are struggling even more so with the enemy within. I think we didn't even have an opportunity to address it because we were dealing with so many external challenges in the past, right? We know exactly who the enemy is. We understand that they've carved up these lines. They've changed the main language. They're now dictating who is getting this education. They're dictating the lines. And now, oh, now you're in Ghana, but you're not in, you know, Togo. This was all crafted and created. And I think one of the biggest pieces of my education that really shifted me was in the 6th grade when I read Destruction of a Black Civilization. Now, it may not have been great for my teachers, but it was revolutionary for me. And so when you understand your background and your history and you can see yourself under one lens or more of a unified lens, that leads to this whole concept or ideology of Pan-Africanism, right? We're all a part of it. And so I would say in the States, because we were very clear about our history as far as us being enslaved and understanding how we got to be of lighter complexion through forcible rapes, I think that was something that others could also sympathize with. So when it does come up, you know, look, you understand how we got here, right? So let's just move on forward. And so I think it's less of a challenge there, but more of a challenge with an African tie, right? People can say, oh yes, I'm Black. Oh yes, I've come from this shared experience, but I'm not African. Don't call me African. And so even doing this whole Black Sustainability Summit, and you're talking about the Sustainable Developmental Goals of the United Nations, there was a challenge with even just the normer of being Black, right? It was more acceptable than being African or more acceptable than being other. And I think even Kwame Nkrumah's wife, you know, dealt with that, right? Mm-hmm. Being from Northern Africa. His mother didn't even accept her. Oh, she's not African, even though she couldn't see. She touched her hair and was like, oh, no, this isn't it. So it continues, you know, it continues to be a challenge in our community, but I think it's one that we can own, and it's going to take a lot of healing. You know, Kwabena, I think to your question earlier is, you know, are we the enemy? You know, are we our greatest enemy? And I would give a little pushback. Yes, we have some challenges, but we don't need to lose sight of an enemy that's now become muted and kind of merged into this larger piece, right? We can start to attack ourselves and then we won't have any progress. So to the same credit of the Pan-African journey, we had our lines that were drawn. I would call it a phase, right? The first phase is to work within ourselves. So now we've built ourselves up in our nation states. Now let's the same way that we've been able to utilize the web to mute those borders and to dissolve those silos that have been there that keep us out of communication. We have the same opportunity here. And to do it in a way that still respects it and understands and addresses, here are the points where we need healing. My brother, I know you're speaking to me in this way because you haven't healed. I know we're sick, you know, and moving forward in that way so we can continue to make sure we don't lose sight of the greater challenge, right? And that is not something that we created, and it is something that we picked up through habit, through integration, through continued interaction, right? We can pick up some unhealthy practices and detrimental things that we continue to replicate, even our elders. So we can take what's been best, take those best practices and move forward. I think that's one of the biggest tasks that the youth have. It's not something that comes light, right? I think our ancestors come back a little angry coming through us to say, my goodness, look at the work that we still have to do, you know, but that's the beautiful challenge that we have. And I think that we are built for it. We are strong, we are resilient. And that's something we're going to need to move forward as a people to make sure that we honor, respect, and know it's not easy work. It's not something you come in and you cannot discard what the elders have been through, but you have to discard the unhealthy practices so we don't continue to run around in a circle.
Wow. Powerful. So one question I have, talking about moving this into something very practical and tangible, deliverables, results. One question I have listening to all of you talk, is there a need for a new Pan-Africanist manifesto which takes cognizance of the times we're in, the technology we have, and which lays out clearly, this is the vision of success. When we've done and performed these actions to deliver these goals, right? do you see the need for that? What we may call a new Pan-Africanist manifesto.
Just start off with a simple mantra, you know, something that's people can say and repeat and repeat and repeat, and it seeps into their psyche, and then they understand, you know, oh, this is us. You know, it's got to be something really simple that people like all campaigns, all the successful campaigns, and whether it's, you know, for a brand or an athlete or what have you not, it's always a very simple hashtag, a simple mantra that people can then associate with, then can start giving it meaning, and then the manifesto comes. I think to give a set of rules, you know, give this is the process that we are going to go through to do this. It doesn't allow for that that community to feel like they are contributing to what it is. And I think the best way to engage people is to give them the opportunity to participate.
Yes.
So yes, I think we do need to have some sort of manifesto, but I think it needs to start with something simple.
So should we set up another webinar with that objective in mind? You see, we move into action, right?
Hey. I hear you.
So we need something that is concise. As they say, brevity is the soul of wit, right? So something concise, which we can all relate to. I love that idea. So should we say, okay, we'll have another webinar and it's going to be geared towards this? Hey, moving us to action and results, tangible results here.
I'm loving the fact that you're putting us on the spot whilst we're live on the camera. Yeah, this is where I'm going to go take my football break, okay?
What is happening? Because it froze for a minute.
Oh,
I'm take a revolution here because I'm in.
Yo, she's back.
Yeah.
Kwabena was just roping us in to signing us up to do some action.
Right. Great.
Exactly. I mean, so yeah, I saying, hey, it's beautiful, the intellectual capacity, the discussions and all that, moving towards tangible actions. I was asking, what is the first step from here? I asked about, do we need a new Pan-Africanist manifesto? And Claire was like, hey, I think we just need to start with a mantra and have inclusive discussions which make people feel a part of the development of whatever the new paradigm is. And I was like, okay, can we schedule a next webinar, which will be geared towards this, right?
Awesome.
That's what we're talking about. So we got Aya on the line, who has an official platform with the African Union, who commands this wide following across Africa. We got Raina, we got Claire, right? Tangible next steps. Aya?
There is a lot we can do. I think this conversation is one of them, because it's also important to have platforms where diaspora with its diversity connects to us on the continent in conversation that is about liberation, that is about organizing. I think the second thing, which is what I've been doing the past few years, and I think is very important, is building movements and start organizing bottom up. Because, you know, we live in a world where conferences is a daily luxury, right? Everyone have a conference, come up with a declaration and so on, but then you go to the villages and people don't relate to anything of that. So I think we should start finally doing the other way around and not do the same mistake of making a middle class, exclusive movement, and start really organizing from the ground. And this will take all of us to do through movements which already started in the US, already started in the UK, already happening in Africa, but not documented. And we need support and solidarity in documenting all of these around the world to show that they are already existing. So how can we take that into something that really benefit Africa, into our economic liberation, our political liberation? And I think on your question on technology, which you asked, the thing with technology that I grapple with is that the democratization of technology, because 70% of Africa is offline. So actually you all have the power of that technology outside. We don't have that power of technology. That is one. The second one is we don't own the technology. We are just consumers and users of technology. So we don't want to also end up in Pan-African consumerism. If we do not start owning that technology, this is another, you know, in modern enslavement. You know, we are enslaved it's manifested in different ways today. So I think we also need to think about, when we are organizing, of the tools we are using, and how do we turn technology into something that we own and something that we win these tools to organize. So next steps for me is to continue to build on a global movement, you know, as Africans in Africa and in the diaspora, and see how can we support each other. If you have access to these tools, how can we then, you support us to use it? If we have access to frameworks and policies, how we can support you to use it, and we can move forward. So we can move forward in the African Union, in the United Nations, with both agendas, but we can push the leaders to really walk the talk.
I'll be the little finger, you know, I can be the thumb, I'll be the little finger, I'll go back out to the community. And it's very simple things like, you know, Barbados has just removed the requirement for visas for a number of African countries. That is progress. For me, it's sometimes meeting people where we are, and we're talking about coming back, but sometimes if you don't go out into the remote to meet people where they are, whether that be in the Caribbean, whether that be in Europe somewhere, and then show them that, oh, this is, oh, you don't know what we got back home, come back home, come and visit. You know, it's those little things as well that you can, little seeds that you can plant along the way. And then, yeah, that's my contribution.
I think I'll join you there. I think as far as African Diaspora Nation, you know, really being the bridge, you know, being the embodiment of the bridge, I think to truly activate it, right, is going to take a mix. It's not going to be just one option, right? Absolutely. So you can go from the ground up. You can encourage from the top down. Unless you're part of the top, you cannot force it, but you can encourage it, right? And then being in the middle or somewhere, I say maybe grass tops instead of grassroots, right, is to pull up and then to pull down from where you are. I would just say, for me, in layman's terms, as far as what that looks like, is really speaking to the network that we already have, and making sure that we disseminate that information, but then giving them a charge, right, to take it a step further. So all these NGOs and different nonprofit organizations that we know are doing the work, or that have gotten to a point where there's diminishing return where you are, maybe there's another charge that's given, right? An encouragement to say, this is what you should do, or please join me in doing this, or sharing this information and continue to pass it along, is one of the options that can actually be done from every single one of us at this point. And moving forward, I think being in a position to have worked with elders that are now saying, you know, well, we would like to see some change, or working with those who have been in positions that don't know how to actually engage the youth, is to give them these tangible steps, right? These next steps, or to give them the names of those who have already said, I would like to be engaged in this way, or here's where I am. I want to do a better job personally of looking through this network that we have, around 2,000 roughly people, to say who fits inside of this youth category and who actually would be a great complement to the work that's already here, and actually bringing them up to task to say, hey, you said that this is what you want. Here's a list of names that you can select from, of qualified youth that are actually looking to be engaged, and see if they'll bite. At least, you know, you have not because you asked not. So those would be my two things that I'll do. So I'll join you on the other pinky finger. It may not be what Aya can produce, but doing my little steps to get us as far as we can.
That is awesome. So again, driving towards tangible next steps is, okay, so Aya has mentioned different movements, different initiatives going on. Should we schedule another? And one thing I have to say though, with technology, even though not all of Africa, you know, about 70% is not covered from a technology access perspective, we can hold ourselves, we can coordinate and hold ourselves accountable for what we do within the 70% using technology, right? So should we convene, say, a meeting of various movements working in the youth space and come up with an integrated program management schedule, right? Which says, this is what you're working on. You're working in this silo, this is what you're working on, you're working in this silo. Hey, if we coordinated, then we can leverage the various strengths that we have and work within one synchronized framework, right? So those are some of the things I'm looking at. You know, we know all these people. Should that be like a tangible next step too?
You're welcome to Addis Ababa for this convening.
Oh, do it in person.
Nice. Nice.
I think so. I think, again, to my point, that we need to meet, like people need to connect, because most of the important conversation happen outside of the sessions that we're going to organize. So this is where people will continue to support each other. So yeah, I mean, if resources are would be mobilized, we can definitely do a convening in Addis at the African Union and have people, young people in different movements from Africa and the diaspora come and engage. And it doesn't have to have an agenda. It can be a start of a conversation, and the youth who will arrive there will define what they want to do with it. Planting seeds, like you said, both.
Yeah, that's giving power to the people.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That is superb. So we're going to do that. We're going to get Claire in from the UK, Reina in from the US, and we'll get it done. So that's an action item, right? Developing and working towards that. And to do that, we'll again leverage some more meetings of this type to plan and strategically frame that so that we make sure that we get in the right people in the space.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Super.
Tangible action is coming.
That was, I mean, you know, just I would like to put a pin just for a second, and just to say, what time did we start and what time have we ended, and what has been accomplished within that time frame? For all of those who can continue to extend and drag these things on, this is very productive, actually. Very productive. So just kudos.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I, you know, for those who are going to listen or watch, there is something for everyone, regardless as to whether you're just starting out on the journey, you're just hearing some of the terminology for the first time, to those who are more well-versed. I think there is some mutual learning that can happen from listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. And we're getting ready to wrap up. It's been almost an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And, yes, it would be good to just summarize for me how this whole journey started. You know, I saw Aya online. I saw she's doing great stuff, great credibility with the youth, great platform. She made herself accessible. We haven't met in person, but she made herself accessible. And Sotfa has been great in bringing us to this point. Just a shout out. Reina is co-president. We co-presidents of African Diaspora Nation together. And we've been talking about our vision to be the embodiment of a bridge and a guiding light for a global African renaissance that impacts the triple bottom line, and also a mission to act within the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you know, common platform to work on. And thank you, Reina, for being here. And Claire, who I saw an interview on YouTube, and she was the one moderating at the Center for Pan-African Thought. I reached out to her on LinkedIn. She didn't know me from Adam, and she was so open-minded and receptive to doing this. I mean, this is amazing stuff. I mean, I need to pinch myself to make sure I'm here, you know, how this all came together, and just look at the firepower we've had on this forum, the various influences and all that. So thank you. And so far as deliverables, what have we accomplished? We've come up with a tangible next step. Aya is saying, come to Addis Ababa, let's do this. So the next step is we're going to plan towards that. And that's beautiful to accomplish all that within an hour, ain't it? So closing comments from you all.
I mean, it's amazing to be a part of this discussion, and it's very inspiring to see what you're all doing individually, as well as how you are organizing the collective to move forward. So it's been refreshing.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, I would just say, in addition to it being an honor to be here with everyone, I would just like to say this has been a great opportunity for us to. I have somebody waking up, so forgive the
Hey, that's cool. That's so African.
Hey,
I've been juggling the mommy duty while we've been sitting here, so you know. But I would say, just reflecting on the progress, our knowledge, and our genuine drive to make sure that this is something that doesn't fizzle out and that everybody actually has a charge. I think it's one thing to talk about it, but for us to be here, to be planning and to be dedicated to these next steps and to be working within our own, I won't say they're silos, but within our own lanes, right? And allowing that overflow between what each of us is doing. I'm actually really excited to meet everyone in person because there is a deeper connection that's there, but I am really, really, really just grateful for the sacrifices that I know everybody on this call has made to make sure that we have a positive future for future generations, and even looking at Pan-Africanism and seeing where some of the gaps are and what we can do, you know, to fill them in so that we can continue doing this work for our people. So I just wanted to give kudos and thanks to everybody on the call.
All right, and Naya?
Thank you as well. It's been an honor to join the webinar, and I think this should be a daily habit of any Pan-Africanist to have conversations with other people from any other end of the world, to always unlearn, because, you know, we have a lot of constructed things about what we think about history and what we think about ourselves. And I think these are the type of conversation that will always be a learning process for us. So it's been really inspiring for me, and I'm really grateful to have been connected to all of you now, and look forward to the next steps, and let us be the 21st century Pan-Africanists for this continent, to uplift it and to take it to the development where she needs to be.
Thank you, Aya. So
I have one more thought, Kwabena, if you don't mind.
Right.
Now that I have a little separation, it's also a testament. It's also a testament to those who are in positions of leadership, right, to maximize what they can do. And so just an additional credit, I would say, for those that are operating or trying to figure out what they can do. I think Claire mentioned it earlier, you know, whether you're as young as mine in the background, you know, or somebody coming in and saying, you know, this is my first time, or my first, come, so he can cut this out of the talk. This is my first time here, or whether I've been in my role for a long time and I'm trying to figure out what to do. I think we can really serve to be less of gatekeepers, you know, and opening those doors. And I think that that's something that has been evident on this call for each of us, to be so willing and so open to saying, yes, use my network. Yes, come to Addis Ababa, you know, or I'm happy to share about it with my numerous followers as a journalist, and even Kwabena, you know, opening things up. So I think that's just one more thing to add in, is we are all in positions of power, whether we are influencers, whether it's just our friends and family, and we should make sure that we maximize it and serve to stop being those gatekeepers and really opening up the doors for all of us to enter.
That is awesome, Raina. So to our listeners and viewers who will be joining us on African Union Day, this has been a special edition of Reconcile Africa, where we have discussions that awaken us to the consciousness of the reality that we are one, while enlivening that spirit of solidarity that results in love and caring acts, which uplift global Africa. Today, we've been talking about redefining the youthful drive to redefine Pan-Africanism, and what an awesome hour it's been. Join us for our next edition in the coming weeks and months. Thank you. I've been your host, Kwabena Boateng. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.